I still remember the first time I saw her, not in person, but on the tiny screen of my phone. She was walking through my living room, wearing my silk robe, and humming a song I used to hum when I made Sunday breakfast for Marcus. The camera's lens was old, maybe dusty, but it caught everything. Her laughter, the way she twirled her hair, how she stood in front of the mirror and practiced calling herself Mrs. Thompson. That used to be my name. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. I sat there in my small apartment, the one bedroom I'd rented after Marcus asked for a divorce, and just watched. Not with anger, not at first. It was disbelief. How easily a person could erase another. 3 months earlier, when Marcus told me he needed space, I knew what that meant. But I hadn't known he'd move her into our home, my home, so soon. I installed the cameras myself, back when I still believed he might be cheating. They were supposed to give me answers. Instead, they became my way of saying goodbye. Now, they were my only window into the life that had been stolen from me. Every night after work, I'd come home, pour a glass of wine, and open the app. Sometimes she cooked in my kitchen, burning the onions I used to caramelize perfectly. Sometimes Marcus came home, wrapped his arms around her, and kissed her the same way he used to kiss me. And sometimes she sat in my favorite armchair and cried. That was new. Because the woman who replaced me didn't look happy. And that was when I realized the cameras weren't just watching her. They were showing me something I'd been too blind to see. I hadn't lost my life. I'd escaped it. The next few weeks passed like a strange dream. Every evening, I'd come home, take off my shoes, and open the camera app like it was a ritual. At first, I told myself I was just curious, that I only wanted closure. But deep down, I was learning something I hadn't expected: peace. Marcus looked tired. His smile, the same one that once melted me, now seemed forced, mechanical, like he was performing happiness instead of living it. And she, the mistress who had replaced me, had begun to show cracks in her perfect facade. One night, I saw her sitting at the dining table, staring at a half-empty glass of wine. Marcus was yelling, his hand raised, his voice sharp like broken glass. For a moment, I thought she might stand up for herself, but she didn't. She just smiled, that same fake, trembling smile I used to wear when I told myself everything was fine. That night, I turned off the camera, and I cried, not for him or for her, but for the version of me that once believed love meant staying silent. The next morning, I decided to stop watching. I deleted the app from my phone and looked around my tiny apartment, the mismatched furniture, the peeling paint, the sunlight filtering through the blinds, and for the first time, it felt mine. I made coffee and sat by the window, listening to the city wake up. No screaming, no pretending, no walking on eggshells, just peace. But peace has a way of attracting chaos. A week later, I received a call from an unknown number. "Mrs. Thompson?" a nervous voice asked. "This is Julia, Marcus's wife. I think we need to talk." I froze. For a moment, I thought it was a cruel joke. Then I heard the trembling in her voice. Fear, desperation, something I knew all too well. We met that afternoon in a small cafe downtown. She looked younger than me, maybe by 15 years, but her eyes carried the same exhaustion I once saw in the mirror. "I know about the cameras," she whispered, leaning forward. "He doesn't, but I saw you watching." I didn't say a word. "I thought you hated me," she continued, "but now I think I understand why you left." Her hands were shaking. There was a bruise on her wrist, the kind I used to cover with long sleeves. In that moment, everything changed. I didn't see her as the other woman anymore. I saw her as another version of me, a woman trapped in a love that was slowly killing her spirit. I reached across the table, took her hand, and said quietly, "You don't have to stay." That was the beginning of something neither of us expected, an unlikely alliance between two women who had both loved the same man and both paid the price for it. And for the first time, I realized maybe the cameras weren't there to expose anyone. Maybe they were there to free us. The cafe meeting with Julia lingered in my mind for days. Her trembling voice, her bruised wrist, her haunted eyes, it was like looking at a ghost from my own past. I couldn't just walk away. So I called her again. We met in the park this time, somewhere open, safe, where no one could follow or listen. She looked smaller than I remembered, wrapped in a long gray coat despite the spring sun. "I told him I wanted space," she said quietly, sitting beside me on the bench. "He didn't take it well." I turned to her. "Did he hurt you again?" She hesitated, then she nodded, just once. My chest tightened. The old anger I'd buried, the rage I'd swallowed for years to keep my marriage peaceful, came back like a storm. "Julia," I said, keeping my voice steady, "you have to get out of that house." She shook her head. "He controls everything. The money, the car, the phone. I can't." "You can," I interrupted. "You just need help." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing her voice, seeing that bruise, remembering the nights I had stood in the same kitchen, silent, terrified, pretending that love could be fixed if I just loved harder. By dawn, I had made my decision. I went to my desk and opened an old box, the one labeled legal. Inside were copies of our divorce papers, property deeds, receipts, and something else, the USB drive that held all the recordings from those hidden cameras. I hadn't watched most of them, but now I had to. I plugged it into my laptop and pressed play. The screen flickered, my old living room, captured in grainy detail. Marcus pacing, shouting, Julia crying in the corner. I clenched my fists as I watched him throw a glass across the room. It shattered. She flinched. He walked away. That was enough. I copied the footage onto a new flash drive, locked it in my purse, and called Julia. "Meet me at the police station," I told her. "We're ending this." When we arrived, she was trembling. I guided her inside, introduced her to a detective I knew from my volunteer work at the women's shelter. We gave our statements. I handed over the video. For the first time, I saw relief in her eyes, fragile but real. "He's going to hate me for this," Julia whispered. I smiled softly. "Let him. Hate is all he has left. You have freedom now." As we walked out into the sunlight, I felt something break free inside me. The last tie that bound me to Marcus, to that house, to that version of myself who'd once mistaken pain for love. But life has a way of testing peace. A few nights later, as I was making dinner, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered. "Clara," a familiar voice said, low and trembling, "you think you can destroy me? You think I don't know who you are?" "Marcus." My heart skipped, but my voice stayed calm. "You should have thought about that before you hurt people." He laughed, a dark, empty sound. "You'll regret this," he hissed. "You and that girl." Then the line went dead. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the phone, my reflection trembling in the kitchen window. But this time, I didn't cry. Because now I understood. The cameras hadn't been a mistake. They had been my protection, and I wasn't afraid anymore. Spring melted into a heavy, humid summer, the kind that makes the air feel thick with memory. I had started volunteering full-time at the women's shelter, mentoring women who were clawing their way out of the same darkness I had once lived in. Each story hurt to hear, but it also reminded me why I had survived. To be here, to help, to rebuild. But then, he came back. It started with small things, a black car parked too long outside my house, hang-up calls in the middle of the night, the faint smell of his cologne near my gate. I wanted to believe it was paranoia, but instinct, that quiet, animal sense that once kept me alive, told me the truth. Marcus was watching. One afternoon, I came home from the shelter and found a note wedged in my doorframe. Just 3 words. You owe me. The handwriting was unmistakable, sharp, angry, controlled. For a moment, I just stood there, the paper trembling between my fingers, the past whispering its threats in my ear again. But then, I did what the old Clara never could. I laughed. It wasn't out of amusement, it was defiance. He no longer had power over me. I took a photo of the note, called my friend Detective Harris, the same man who'd helped Julia press charges, and said calmly, "He's back." The next day, a restraining order was filed. Marcus was warned to stay 500 feet away from my property. But when someone's obsession turns into their identity, paper boundaries mean little. 3 nights later, I woke to the sound of shattering glass. I grabbed the phone, heart pounding, and whispered to the 911 operator, "He's here." Then I turned on my security cameras, my new cameras, crystal clear, hidden everywhere. Marcus was in my living room, his silhouette flickering in the glow of the streetlight. He wasn't drunk, he wasn't wild. He looked calm, too calm. "Clara," he said, scanning the dark room, "I just want to talk." I stepped forward from the hallway, the phone still in my hand. "Then talk," I said, my voice steady despite the shaking in my chest. He turned, smirking. "You ruined my life. You turned Julia against me. You made me a criminal." I met his eyes. "No, Marcus, you did that all by yourself." He took a step toward me. I took a step back. "The cameras are still on," I warned. "Everything you say, everything you do, recorded." His jaw twitched. For a moment, I thought he might lunge, but then the sound of sirens sliced through the night air. He froze. I didn't blink. When the police dragged him out, he turned once more toward me. "You'll never escape me," he spat. But I just smiled faintly and said, "I already did." The following morning, I made myself coffee and sat on the porch as the sun rose, soft, golden, forgiving. The house was quiet again, but this time the silence didn't feel lonely. It felt earned. I took out my journal and wrote one sentence. "Freedom doesn't come when they leave. It comes when you stop fearing their shadow." That was the day I truly began to live. The days that followed Marcus's arrest felt strange. Like walking through a house after a storm, everything still standing, but the air thick with what almost was. For the first time in years, I wasn't surviving, I was living. I began to reclaim the spaces he had once haunted. I painted the walls soft yellow, opened the curtains wide, and let the light in. Each stroke of paint felt like a declaration. This is mine now. The house that once echoed with fear began to hum with warmth again. At the shelter, women started calling me Miss Clara the Brave. It made me laugh. I didn't feel brave. I just felt tired of being afraid. But maybe that's what bravery really is. Not the absence of fear, but moving through it anyway. One afternoon, after a long session with one of the younger women, Julia called. Her voice trembled on the other end. "Mom, I saw the news. They said he broke into your house. Are you okay?" I smiled softly. "I'm fine, baby. Better than fine, actually." There was silence, then a quiet sob. "I'm sorry," she said, "for not believing you before, for choosing him over you." I closed my eyes, letting the words settle like rain after a drought. "You don't owe me an apology," I said. "We both had to learn the hard way who he really was." Then, after a pause, "You're safe now. That's all that matters." As summer deepened, life found a rhythm. I joined a community gardening group, started teaching self-defense classes for women, and even began attending Sunday dinners with my neighbor Ruth, a retired nurse with a wicked sense of humor and a laugh that could fill a room. Sometimes, when the sun dipped behind the trees and the fireflies began their dance, I'd sit on the porch with a glass of sweet tea and just breathe. It was such a simple thing, breathing without fear, yet it felt like luxury. One evening, as I locked up my gate, I saw a woman standing at the edge of my yard. She was young, nervous, clutching a small duffel bag. "Miss Clara?" she asked timidly. I recognized the face, one of the women from the shelter. "I didn't know where else to go," she whispered. I smiled and opened the gate. "You came to the right place." That night, as I set up the guest room, I realized how far I'd come. This house, once a cage, had become a sanctuary, not just for me, but for others finding their way out of the dark. A few weeks later, I stood in front of a small group of women at the shelter, sharing my story for the first time publicly. When I reached the part about the cameras, about taking back control, the room went silent. Then, one woman whispered, "How did you keep going?" I smiled. "Because pain may break you," I said, "but it also teaches you what you're made of. And once you see your own strength, really see it, no one can take that away." Applause rippled softly through the room. Tears glistened. And for the first time, I felt something even stronger than survival: peace. That night, as I stood by the window watching the city lights shimmer, I whispered to myself, "This is not the end of my story. This is where it finally begins." It was a quiet Sunday morning, the kind I used to dream about when life was chaos. The air smelled of jasmine from the porch vines, and the sun spilled gold across my kitchen floor. I was making pancakes, humming along to Aretha Franklin, when the doorbell rang. I wiped my hands on my apron and opened the door. Standing there, nervously shifting from foot to foot, was a man I hadn't seen in nearly 30 years. "Clara?" he said softly, his voice familiar but aged by time. "David?" I blinked, unsure if my eyes were playing tricks on me. David Johnson, my college sweetheart, the one who'd moved to Chicago chasing a dream, while I stayed behind to build a family that eventually broke me. He gave a small smile. "You still make pancakes on Sundays, huh?" I laughed, a little breathless. "And you still have terrible timing." He chuckled, that same warm sound I remembered from a lifetime ago. "Can I come in?" We sat at the kitchen table, two people shaped by different storms, but still carrying the same gentle understanding. He told me about his years working as a teacher, his wife passing away 5 years ago, and how he'd recently moved back to town. "I read about you," he admitted. "What you've done at the shelter, it's incredible, Clara." I looked down, feeling that old shyness creep in. "I just didn't want other women to go through what I did." He nodded, his eyes full of quiet admiration. "I always knew you'd turn your pain into something powerful." The way he said it, steady, sincere, hit deeper than I expected. It had been years since someone looked at me like that, not as a victim, not as a survivor, but as a woman. Over the next few weeks, David became a steady presence in my life, not overwhelming, just there. He helped with the garden, brought coffee in the mornings, and listened when I spoke about the past. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset behind the trees, he said, "You know, Clara, it's never too late for joy." I smiled, sipping my tea. Joy and I, we're still learning how to trust each other again. He reached over, gently brushing a strand of hair from my face. "Then let me help you remind her." That night, after he left, I sat in the quiet and thought about how far I'd come, from betrayal and fear to freedom and light. Love, I realized, doesn't always come crashing in with fireworks. Sometimes it returns softly, like morning sunlight through half-open blinds. A week later, I spoke again at the shelter. I told the women that healing isn't about forgetting the past. It's about learning to dance with it without letting it lead. As they applauded, I caught David's eyes in the crowd. And for the first time in decades, I didn't feel broken or cautious. I felt alive. That evening, while closing up the house, I looked at my reflection in the mirror. Silver strands framed my long, dark hair, Laugh lines softened my face, but behind my eyes, there was peace. I signed those divorce papers with a smile, I whispered, and I added my freedom. It had been months since David knocked on my door that morning. In that time, our lives had quietly intertwined. Coffee on Tuesdays, movie nights on Fridays, long walks on Sundays. But this evening felt different. The air was heavy with spring rain, and the sound of thunder rolled softly in the distance. David had insisted on coming over anyway, saying storms made conversations honest. We sat by the window, 2 mugs of hot cocoa between us, watching the rain streak down the glass. Outside, the streetlights blurred into golden halos. Inside, time felt suspended. "Do you ever think," he asked, "how life gives us second chances just when we've stopped asking for them?" I smiled faintly. I used to think second chances were for fools. He raised an eyebrow. And now? Now I think they're for the brave. He laughed, leaning back in his chair. Then I guess we're both pretty brave, Clara. For a while, we said nothing, just listened to the rain and the faint hum of the old jazz record playing in the background. The world outside was chaos, but here it felt calm. After a moment, he reached for my hand. His fingers were warm, steady. "Clara, I don't want to rush things, but every time I see you smile, I realize how much life I missed waiting to feel this again." I looked at him, really looked. The creases on his face told stories, just like mine. The years had been unkind at times, but there was a softness now, a kindness that only comes from surviving. "You're not the only one," I whispered. I'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen without judgment. He squeezed my hand gently. Then maybe we both needed to remember. The thunder rumbled closer, but neither of us moved. It wasn't the kind of love that burned like fire. It was quieter, steadier, a warmth that came from understanding, not obsession. Later that night, when he stood to leave, he paused by the door. "I'll call you tomorrow?" he asked. I smiled. "You better." He laughed softly, kissed my forehead, and disappeared into the rain. That night, I didn't feel alone. For the first time in a long time, I didn't dread the sound of silence in my house. Because now, the silence carried promise, not emptiness. The next morning, I stood by the garden, breathing in the scent of wet earth and blooming roses. The storm had passed, and sunlight glimmered through the clouds. I thought about how love, real love, wasn't about filling a void. It was about finding peace beside someone who saw all your cracks and still called you beautiful. And maybe, just maybe, that's what I'd added to those divorce papers all those years ago, a space for something new to begin. It started with the cough. At first, it was nothing, or so David said, just a tickle in his throat, the kind you blame on cold weather or old houses. But I noticed how it lingered, how his hands trembled ever so slightly when he reached for his cup. By the 3rd week, the warmth in his eyes was shadowed by fatigue. He smiled through it, of course, that stubborn man always did. "Just allergies," he said. "Spring's always rough on me." But I had learned to hear the truth behind the words people didn't say. One afternoon, I found him sitting on the porch, coughing into a handkerchief. When he saw me, he quickly tucked it into his pocket. But I had already seen the stain, dark, red, undeniable. "David," I whispered, "that's not allergies." He looked away, his jaw tightening. "I didn't want to worry you. You already have." That night, we sat at the kitchen table in silence. He finally told me, "Lung cancer, stage 3. The words fell like stones into the still air. I didn't cry, not right away. I just sat there, staring at the man who had helped me believe in love again, and realized how fragile that belief could be. The following weeks became a blur of hospital visits, medication schedules, and sleepless nights. David refused to show weakness. He'd still come to the community center, smile at the women, joke with the children. "Don't look at me like that, Clara," he'd say with that crooked grin. "I'm not gone yet." But when he'd fall asleep on the couch, I'd sit beside him and trace the veins on his hand, memorizing every line, like someone reading a holy text they know they'll soon lose. One evening, after his latest round of chemotherapy, he asked me to walk with him to the garden. The night air was cool, scented with jasmine. He stopped by the roses I had planted years ago, the same ones that had bloomed after my divorce. "I used to think these flowers were just pretty," he said, voice hoarse, "but now I think they're proof that pain can still grow into beauty." I smiled through tears. You always did have a way with words. He took my hand. "Promise me something, Clara. When I'm gone, don't stop living. You've built a life from ashes before. You can do it again." "Don't talk like that," I said, my voice cracking. But he just smiled, that same quiet smile that had once melted my defenses. "I'm not afraid of dying," he whispered. "I'm afraid of leaving you behind." That night, I held him until he fell asleep. The rain began again, tapping softly on the window, the same way it had the first time he came into my life. Only this time, the rain didn't feel lonely. It felt like a heartbeat, steady, eternal, reminding me that love doesn't end when breath does. The morning David left was quiet, too quiet. Even the birds seemed to sense it. The house that once echoed with laughter and music now held its breath. I woke up before dawn, as I always did lately, and went to check on him. He was still asleep, or at least I wanted to believe he was. His chest rose once, then slowly fell. I waited for the next breath. It didn't come. "David," I whispered, my voice trembling, "honey, wake up." But silence answered. The world didn't end with thunder. It ended with a sigh. I don't remember calling the ambulance. I don't remember the neighbors who came to comfort me, or the kind nurse who touched my shoulder. All I remember is holding his hand, cold, still, and heavy with the weight of every memory we shared. His ring, simple silver, worn by time, glinted faintly in the light. I pressed it to my lips and closed my eyes. "I promised you I'd keep living," I whispered, "but how do I do that when half my heart is gone?" The funeral was small, just as he wanted. He never liked attention, never wanted pity. His daughter, Maya, came from Atlanta. She hugged me so tightly I could feel her grief trembling through her. "Thank you," she said softly, "for giving my father happiness in his last years." I nodded, unable to speak, because the truth was, he had given me just as much, maybe more. When they lowered him into the ground, I placed a single rose from our garden on the casket. The same rose he once said symbolized beauty born of pain. The petals fluttered in the wind like a soft goodbye. Weeks passed. The house felt emptier than ever. I'd find myself setting 2 plates at breakfast, reaching for a voice that no longer answered. Grief is strange. It doesn't come in waves like people say. It comes in fragments. The smell of his cologne, a song on the radio, the sight of a man wearing his favorite hat. But one morning, as I sat on the porch drinking my coffee, I saw the sunrise. The sky was painted in gold and crimson, the exact colors David had loved to photograph. I could almost hear him say, "Look at that, Clara. The world still finds ways to be beautiful." And for the first time since he passed, I smiled. That evening, I found his old notebook, the one he used to write poetry in. On the last page, written in his shaky handwriting, were the words, If you're reading this, it means my journey's done. Don't mourn me too long, my love. Instead, plant something new. Watch it grow. That's where I'll be. I cried. Then I went to the backyard, dug a small hole beside the rose bush, and planted a new sapling, a magnolia tree. As the soil covered its roots, I whispered, "Here's to new beginnings, my love." The wind rustled through the garden, almost like a reply. That night, I slept peacefully for the first time in months, not because the pain was gone, but because I knew it had changed shape. It had become strength. David taught me that love isn't measured in years lived, but in hearts touched. And mine, though cracked, was still beating. Clara didn't just survive. She began to live again. She turned her grief into purpose, helping others who had lost someone. Her home became a place of healing, where broken hearts found warmth and stories found endings that didn't hurt so much. It started with a single magnolia tree. By the next spring, its branches stretched toward the sky, heavy with white blossoms, bold, fragrant, and alive. Every time I looked at it, I felt David near. His voice seemed to whisper in the rustle of the leaves, "Keep going, Clara. There's more love left in you yet." So I did. At first, I began volunteering at the community center downtown. Mostly small things: cooking meals, reading to the elderly, helping women fill out forms for housing and jobs. But soon, I realized something. So many of them weren't just hungry for food or help. They were hungry for hope. I knew that kind of hunger. That's when the idea came: a small home where people could come to heal, talk, cry, rebuild. A place not defined by pain, but by rebirth. I called it the Magnolia House. It started in my own living room: 5 folding chairs, a pot of tea, and a sign by the window that read, "You are not alone." At the first meeting, 3 women came. One had lost her husband, another her job, and the third her sense of purpose. We shared stories, tears, and eventually laughter. By the end of the evening, I realized something beautiful. Healing wasn't something you did alone. It was something you gave to others, and in doing so, it found its way back to you. Within a year, the Magnolia House grew. We moved into a bigger space, donated by a local church, with walls painted warm yellow and shelves full of books and framed photographs of smiling faces. People came from all over town: widows, single mothers, veterans, young people searching for meaning. We planted a magnolia tree outside that new house, too. Every spring, when it bloomed, I'd stand under it and remember how far I'd come, from a woman broken by betrayal to one rebuilt by purpose. One evening, a young woman named Alicia stayed behind after a meeting. She looked barely 30, with eyes that carried too much sorrow for her age. "My husband left me," she said, tears trembling on her lashes. "He said I wasn't enough." I reached across the table and held her hand. "Then he didn't deserve you," I said softly, "because you are more than enough. You just forgot, and that's okay. We'll help you remember." She cried, then smiled. And in that smile, I saw my younger self, the one who had once believed her life was over until it wasn't. Years passed. The Magnolia House became more than a place. It became a movement. We hosted workshops, therapy circles, job training, and community gardens. And every time someone asked why I started it, I'd say, because love doesn't die when a person does. It grows, just like a magnolia. One morning, as I walked through the garden, the sun broke through the clouds, casting golden light on the flowers. I closed my eyes and felt warmth spread through me, the kind that wasn't just from the sun. "I did it, David," I whispered. "I kept living. I found beauty again. The wind stirred gently, lifting the scent of magnolia blossoms into the air, and for a moment I could almost hear him laugh, deep, kind, and proud. Now, at 60 years old, I look back and see a life that wasn't perfect. I lost, I loved, I broke, I healed. And through it all, I became something I never thought I'd be again, whole. I learned that sometimes the hardest chapters lead to the most beautiful endings. And mine began the day I thought it was over. Because strength isn't about never falling. It's about planting a magnolia where your heart once shattered and watching it bloom.